Great taste. Sweet. Sour. So good to taste.
Welcome to Great Taste. I'm your host, Steve Boss. 60 minutes of deliciousness upcoming. And I'm really thrilled to welcome back Matt Haines to the show. Matt was a guest on the show after the publication of his first book, The Big Book of King Cake. And now he's back because he's just written The Little Book of King Cake. Matt, welcome back to Great Taste.
Yeah, Steve, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be back. It's been a year about since we talked last.
Yes, and king cake has its time, right? In the sun, essentially. Well, some places probably in the sun, some places not. But you kind of got to get it while it's good. Though, I think the season has expanded quite a bit, and it's not just limited to that very special time, which maybe you could tell everybody about.
Yeah, so the traditional time in New Orleans, like if you go to New Orleans now and you ask a New Orleanian who's been here forever when you can eat king cake, they're going to tell you you can eat it between the Epiphany or 12th night, which is January 6th, and Mardi Gras Day, which this year, it changes every year, but this year is February 21st. And so that's the official, like, kind of New Orleans window. I think what you're alluding to, though, is that now you can definitely find bakeries in Louisiana who are cheating, and you might see like a 4th of July king cake and with, red, white, and blue, or you might see a king cake that kind of shaped a little bit like a turkey on Thanksgiving. And so you can get some at some places year round, but you're going to get that king cake probably slapped out of your hand if some New Orleanians see it, because they really believe, and I kind of agree, that it's special when you can eat it in a small space. But my response always is, like, originally we could only eat the original time you were supposed to eat king cake was only on 12th night, only January 6th. It originally had everything to do with the Christmas season and nothing to do with Mardi Gras. And so we've already kind of bastardized it a little bit by making it a carnival season thing. That's, of course, 120 years ago that we did that. So people here don't really know that, but it is kind of a tradition that's always evolving. But I'd say 99% of king cakes are eaten during that 12th night to carnival to Fat Tuesday window.
We talked a lot about the fact that king cake has this very long history, thousands of years actually. And so I do wish that you'd kind of go over it really quickly again, because I want to mention in regards to that I was in Portugal in November and went into a bakery, and whoa, there was king cake, but it's not the same. It's not the purple and glittery kind or anything like that. And it also is traditional, I believe, for it to be sold at that time of year up until like Christmas in Portugal, for example. So I was really excited because I was like, oh, I know that because I've had that on the show.
Right. Well, it's so funny. So I think from the bolo ray there, which translates to cake of kings. So king cake, same exact thing, same tradition. And I think they've done, quote unquote, bastardized it as well, because they would have originally eaten on January 6th only, because that's the day that the Christians believe the three kings found the baby Jesus and brought these gifts. And so we eat on January 6th. It's called king cake because of the three kings. It was called Three Kings Cake. And now they've just moved. They've opened their season on the early end. So they'll eat it in November and December, kind of through, I think they will eat it all the way through January, or maybe just on 12th night, but 12th night is still, the January 6th is still the big day you would eat it. But it's a tradition that goes all the way back to ancient Rome. And they would have a cake in the middle of their Saturnalia festival to honor the they call it the return of the sun, because on the winter solstice, which is when the festival was centered around, that's the darkest, longest night of the year. And so every single day after the winter solstice is getting a little bit brighter, the days are getting a little bit longer, so you feel like the worst is kind of behind you. And so that's worth celebrating with their biggest festival. And they would have a cake called the Saturnalia cake. What we call the Saturnalia cake now, and inside there'd be a bean hidden, and whoever got that bean would be crowned king or queen of the Saturnalia. They would get to choose all the entertainment. They would also be sacrificed to the gods at the end of that festival. So it's funny, like in New Orleans, we get our crowned king or queen if we could find the baby inside the cake, and we have to buy the next cake. And people really complain about that, but I'm like, man, you could be sacrificed to the gods. It could be so much worse. So when Rome spread out across Europe and became the Roman Empire, they brought that tradition with them, which is why we have versions of king cake in Bulgaria and in Greece and Cyprus and in England. They have like a 12th night pudding where they have a coin hidden inside, but it's the same kind of tradition. The French have the galette des rois, cake of kings. The Germans have the Dreikönigskuchen, cake of the three kings. Portugal has bolo rei. And when southern France and Spain, a lot of our early European settlers coming to New Orleans came from those places. And so it makes sense that our king cake is kind of most reminiscent of those ones and that tradition. So that's basically how it got to New Orleans, at least.
And is it fair to say that New Orleans and the popularity of king cake there is the reason that you now see king cake in many, many places around the United States, more than you would have ever seen it before? So, for example, a young baker that I know in Memphis, Tennessee, I saw his Facebook a couple of weeks ago, and he's got king cake happening with, you can buy little figurines of baby Jesus to go with it as an extra.
Yeah. I think that I would guess that I bet that anywhere that the French and Spanish or even the Portuguese in those earlier like 1700s and 1800s, anywhere they would have gone, they probably brought that tradition with them. But then I imagine it's a scenario where it kind of just died out in most places because it was like an isolated thing. And so I do think that now most of the reason that there would be a king cake you can get in New York City is because that baker is either has ties to New Orleans or has a love for New Orleans, or maybe they're French or something and they have the galette des rois, so they're bringing that there. But I imagine most of the king cakes you see in the US now at that random bakery here or there is probably through something related to New Orleans, would be my guess.
Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about Miley and why Miley came to be.
Yeah, so I was very proud when I wrote the Big Book of King Cake, and I teach an after school class for an hour a day, and it's really fun. And the kids are, like it depends on the week, but like this particular time, it was like they were fifth graders. And so I was bringing this Big Book of King Cake to show the fifth graders, thinking like, oh, they'll think that Mr. Matt is cool because he wrote a whole book. And most of them were like kind of politely impressed. And one of the kids said, Mr. Matt, why would you make an entire book about king cake? Like it's just king cake. And I was like, what? I mean, I had just come from, a year and a half of research and writing and photography of this thing. I'm like, what are you talking about? Just king cake? This is the most incredible, snack item we have and the most incredible food thing eaten during Mardi Gras, just king cake. And then I realized like, oh, he just doesn't really, they eat tons of king cake. These kids, but they don't always realize what makes it so special. And so I thought it would be a fun thing to follow up the Big Book of King Cake with the Little Book of King Cake as kind of a fun way for them to learn, for kids who are reading it to learn, hey, this is what makes this thing that we all eat every Friday and oftentimes every day of the week during carnival season, a unique and treasured thing.
Mm-hmm. And so tell us a little bit about that process, because obviously you're a writer. First of all, I should mention to everyone that that's your profession. You're a freelance writer and you write for publications like the New York Times and obviously publish books and local publications also, the New Orleans Times-Picayune, I believe, and others. So was the process any different writing this children's book?
It was because with the Big Book of King Cake, there's so much like logistical considerations. I mean, we were coming out of the pandemic, and like there were staff shortages kind of across the food and beverage industry. And so we had a hurricane in New Orleans during it. And so now I'm trying to like basically herd 75 very talented cats, bakers, to fit into like this schedule. And like I've got my photographer with me and he and I has to work for our schedule when we're traveling around the state trying to make this work. Whereas the Little Book of King Cake, my girlfriend and I, we moved to London for 6 months just to try out something different. And so I was able to mostly do it. It's most of the process was me going on walks and kind of figuring out how this story is going to work. And then me blocking out that story into 31 pages, and then me sharing that with one illustrator who she's from Lafayette, Louisiana. She's so talented. We had we were on Zoom, probably 2-3 times a day. So that was really intensive, but much less so as far as like needing to, like the logistics of it were much easier than the Big Book of King Cake.
Mm-hmm. And so have you shared that story with these kids that you teach every week.
Yeah, I definitely I brought it into that kid, and I was like, if you want to see what makes king cake special and why I'd write a book about king cake, check this out. And one of my favorite things about doing the Little Book of King Cake that I didn't even know I would love so much is going into schools and doing readings of it. Has been so much fun, and it's like so interactive, and it's fun to see how into this topic and into like their heritage they are. Especially like this time of year that in New Orleans and Louisiana, such like a boisterous, colorful time of year. It's like months of celebration, which is so great. But then also it's fun to like push them. They often think of king cake as, oh, the flavors are going to be, cinnamon, and you're going to have purple, green, and gold sugar. And it's a little bit of a dry cake. But like showing them all of these different bakers and how all of these different bakers put their unique twists on it, and whether like those bakers focus on tradition or history or having special ingredients or decadence of their cakes or whatever. Like there's all these different varieties, and I think a lot of times those students are then excited to try some of those different varieties, which I think is cool.
And New Orleans is a city now that has even more of a representation of diversity, not only in its people, but in its bakers and in its styles of king cake, which you certainly pointed out in the Big Book of King Cake, and you carry that through with how you present the Little Book of King Cake. So I imagine all these kids, no matter where they're from, whether they're local or whether they came from some other country, can see and relate to these different king cakes that you present.
Yeah, with the Big Book, there's 75 bakers. And so there's lots to choose from. It's not easy to make sure, like to show diversity, but like I felt like there's a lot of room to be like, okay, these are the cakes I want to show because they're just delicious. But also I need to make sure that there's like, I want to make sure there's a Jewish baker. I want to make sure there's like, we're 60% African-American in New Orleans. So there should be a lot of Black bakers in this book if we're going to be representative. There's a big Honduran population. We should have some Honduran bakers. Vietnamese is a huge population here. And so, but there's 75 bakers to choose from. And so I feel like the Big Book, it felt to me like in the aggregate of all these 75 stories, you get a real broad idea of what New Orleans and its people are like and interested in. And now the Little Book, I mentioned a lot of cakes, like in a lot of bakers in little spots here and there, but it really focuses on 7 of them. And so it was kind of a balancing beam of like making sure that the bakers were as diverse as the city is, both like racially and also by gender, and also just the neighborhoods in which those bakeries exist, but also making sure the cakes were really different from each other, and that the cakes focused on different things. Like each of the different king cakes, they're all in the book, they're kind of like personified. So they talk to Miley. And so they all are telling her what they think is special about king cake. So I wanted to make sure that the baker, that the cake that's talking about that tradition is important. I want to make sure that's a really traditional bakery. The cake that's talking about, kind of weird, crazy flavors, I wanted to make sure it was a crazy one. So I used the Audubon Zoo's Insectarium. And so I was trying to also get diversity of like, why those, what's special about those cakes. I want that to be diverse as well. So it was a kind of a balancing project in that regard.
I have to say that my smile was, I guess, ongoing throughout the experience of reading the book. It was fun, and the illustrations are really also have that joyous element to them. And so fantastic job. I'll just say, Matt, now you've got these bookends, right? The Big Book of King Cake and the Little Book of King Cake.
Yeah, no, it's so much fun. I mean, there's so many serious things in the world to talk about. And then this is important because of all the reasons we've already talked about, but it's also just a joyful thing. And I think the reason why king cake works as a topic is because it's something that everyone in the city loves. You will be hard pressed to find somebody who's like, no, I don't like king cake. Everyone loves it. Or even if they don't like the taste, they still love the tradition of it. But the fun part is nobody can agree on who's got what king cake they like the best. everyone's got that. So it's something that people are passionately disagreeing about, but it's something we all just kind of, it's just part of our tradition of being here in Louisiana, which is a really nice unifying thing. And there's not that many things that unify us sometimes in our normal discourse. So this time of year is really special, I think.
Well, we're back with Matt Haines, and he has written 2 books recently, The Big Book of King Cake and The Little Book of King Cake. And I wanted to really visit with you about the special quality of experience culinary-wise in New Orleans. However, I have to change tactic a little bit and explore something that you happened to mention to me recently. And that was that you and your girlfriend had moved to London for 6 months to check that out. So before we get to New Orleans, where you live and appreciate the culture, tell us a little bit about this sojourn to London for 6 months.
Yeah, I'm a freelance writer, so I can work from anywhere. During this time of year, or Mardi Gras time of year, I've got to be in New Orleans to sell books about king cake. But other than that, I can be anywhere. And Mariana, my girlfriend, is also a freelance. She works in communications for a variety of like healthcare organizations, and she can do that from anywhere. In fact, many of her clients are in Europe, so it's even better for her. And so right before the pandemic, we were like, so this is back in like 2019, we're like, let's move someplace. This will be so great. Next year, let's move to London. And then the pandemic happened, and that was no longer possible. And so as that started to pass, we were like, well, what about this idea we had? And so in May of 2022, all the way until pretty much November 1st, we were living in London, and it was amazing. And I love New Orleans. I love it here. I love the friendships I've built here. The food is incredible. And also I'm from New York City originally. And so I also have a love for like those giant cities, and London is one of them. And so, I mean, it's a beautiful place to be. The food is so varied. Every day I walked to like a classical, I'm a trombone performance major in undergrad. So I'd walk to concerts or plays or an art gallery. And that's all there. And so I think it was a good balance to my time in New Orleans, which New Orleans is incredibly cultured as well. But the kind of arts that are focused on here are a little bit different than some of the arts you'd find in London. So for me, it was like a really refreshing, regenerative time. Also, I probably worked at 60% capacity during that time. So it was also pretty relaxing for me.
And did you get to explore the food culture? I know you did. So were there any things that stand out to you? Like, for example, going to the markets, that like Borough Market and other.
Yeah, I mean, Borough Market was I went there constantly, particularly for the sausage rolls at, I'm going to draw a blank on the place, but there is Ginger Pig. And that sausage roll I probably had like 6 or 7 times while I was there. It was so good. And then, I'm trying to remember I think to me, what was so striking about London was just the incredible, people from like New York City, there must be somebody from every country in the world is there someplace in London. And so you can get that food. And so to have that kind of, in New Orleans, we have some very good Indian restaurants. In London, there's infinity Indian restaurants. And so just to have the opportunity to learn about the different kinds of curries that exist and the different regions of India, that was so fun. And one of my favorite meals was my last meal. It was I'm totally going to draw a blank on it, but maybe I can send it over to you. But they had 2 things stood out to me. One of them was their service. Their way of doing service was they give you 4 gigantic, like oversized playing cards. And they kind of acknowledge that people want to experience their meal in different ways. So if you want to be left alone during the meal, just put this card up, and that's how you do that. If you want to be given like the history of every dish that we make here, put this card up and we will tell you all those details. If you really want to know about the kind of like the fun history behind, or not history, the fun like information behind the meal, or like the ingredients that go into it and where we source those ingredients, put this card up. And I thought that was really cool. And I put the history one up, and I loved it. And they specialize in a lot of kind of older English foods, and one of them was something called a meat fruit. I don't know if you've ever had meat fruit before. It looks like it looks exactly like an orange. You would think you're holding an orange, unpeeled, and then like you cut into it, and it's got pate inside the orange, and it's the orange. It's actually like a kind of a jelly that you might serve with a pate, like a liver mousse or something. It was just so fun, and they explained to me that the history was because they wanted to play pranks. This is like a joke in the 17th century or something like that. They would try to fool people into think they were taking a bite out of a citrus, and then it would turn out to be something different, maybe a meatball they'd put inside or something like that. And so I don't know. I had so many great meals there. I'm happy to be back in New Orleans, but that was a really fun time.
I think it's really fascinating that was the type of experience that Matt Haines would remember and want to share, considering the fact that you wrote the big book of king cake, which is also, has so much history, so much culture behind it, and it just sounds right.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I love to. The thing that makes everything most interesting to me, anything, is to understand how it connects us to people in other parts of the world currently, but also to the people that existed before us. So like learning that king cake existed thousands of years ago, and that tradition was enjoyed by the ancient Romans in a very similar way to the way we enjoy it in New Orleans now, is so interesting to me, in the same way that when I'm sitting at that restaurant and cutting into meat fruit, learning that English people in the 17th century would have been doing something similar. I think it could not get cooler to me than that.
I can't wait to go back to London again. And I would like to explore other areas of England, but there is, as you say, so much, the richness of diversity there is extraordinary. Like New York City, that's as far in my experience anyway, that's a good comparison, but it has obviously a very different feel to it. And we have, my wife and I have this funny thing, because every time that we think about like eating somewhere, we always recall this restaurant in London that we went to 5 years ago, because it's kind of like we say, what would you like to do tonight? And I go, I'd like to go to Chai Nasto, and which was the place in London,
Yeah.
So,
what did you love so much about it?
I loved the fact that we sat next to two Indian gentlemen who they, at the time, and I don't know I know they're still open, but they had 3 places at the time. And these guys lived near one of the places, which was right by Wembley Stadium. But the place that they went to was where we was about an hour from Wembley Stadium.
Okay.
And so they were telling us all about, we were sitting next to them and they were telling us all about, why did they, oh yeah, it's great. But we like, for some reason they liked this particular branch better. And then they were giving us, oh, you have to have this and you have to have that. So it was really fun because we had never been there before, and they were telling us, what we should get. And everything that they told us was fantastic. And it was very casual. And I liked the whole concept. 3 brothers who essentially wanted to recreate the kind of street food that they were used to in the south of India, or food that they would have with their grandmother at their grandmother's home. So, but street food sitting down essentially. And so it was very comfortable and very fun and light, and every single dish had so many layers of flavor to it. And then at the end, it was funny. We got to meet 2 of the brothers who happened to be there, and so that was just an extra. That was the extra icing on the cake, or whatever you want to say.
Yeah. No, it's so cool, and like to get that experience while being in London, and then go a couple of blocks and you get something completely different experience. And there's just like cities like that. It's just like limitless opportunities to travel the world without leaving that city is so cool, I think.
Yeah. Or you go to a fair and the guy's there with his sheep and you get to pet the sheep, and then there's sheep cheese right there,
Yeah, right. Yes. It feels very connected. And even just like walking around, like you could go, I don't like take a train 30 minutes, like on the tube, you go to the end of the line and then you can go on this beautiful hike with where sheep are everywhere and stuff, and incredible, like a pub with like a town with 1 or 2 pubs in it. And I loved it.
Yeah, and I now have to say one more thing because you mentioned the pub. Well, I love they have these pies that you can find a lot in pubs. That's part of pub food. And my wife's vegetarian, and we went to this one pub that had they had a vegetarian pie on the menu, and it was one of the most amazing things that we ate the entire time we were there. It was so chock full of wonderful flavor, and the vegetables inside were just astounding. And I think it had celery root was in there, and some other things, and so it was really, I think it was really wonderful to just see the care that the people that we met anyway lavished on the foods that they were making. And that to me always stands out. If you walk into a fish and chips spot, you can find fish and chip spots everywhere. But if you walk into one and you can just see on the faces of the people that are there that not only this is the place they want to be, they don't want to be anywhere else. This is what they love doing. And they are so happy to have you come and experience their particular style of fish and chips, for example.
Right. And they're like an institution in that neighborhood where they're serving you, but also they served your parents. And, that's so cool. Yeah. You said pie, because pie to me, if I was living in London and I was going to write a book, the big book of something, I'd probably do the big book of British pies or something, because similar to king cake, it's like a beloved thing, but also different places put their different spins on it. I remember I had a braised beef pie that was like topped with fried oysters and horseradish, and it was so great. I've not seen that version anywhere else, and it feels like there are similar to limitless numbers of king cakes. There's limitless numbers of pies out there to try. Yeah.
That sounds like a good project. You might want to keep it on the burner, possibly.
Yes, if it's an excuse to just eat a lot of pies, I'll take it.
Right. Let's talk about New Orleans. Let's talk about how you would essentially communicate to friends who are coming. So some friends of yours are coming to New Orleans, and they're going to be there for a weekend, and they love to eat and they love to, experience culture. And you wrote a column. Well, I don't know if it's a column, but you wrote an article a number of years ago that people can find on your website. I think it's matthaineswrites.com.
Yeah, Matt Haines, yep, exactly right. matthaineswrites.com.
And so 72 hours in New Orleans, but that was a few years ago. So what I want to do too is I want to just real briefly tell you my experience, which is more than a few years ago. Yeah. And you can see, because I think some of these places, or at least one or more of them, are still around as far as institutions are concerned, and we can see if they fit into today what's going on. So I remember very distinctly going to several places, Commander's Palace, and we're talking about I'm not even going to say how long ago, a long time ago. Commander's Palace, Camellia Grill, the Café du Monde, of course, for beignets. And then I have to just relate, because I know that you'll appreciate this. I don't remember the name of the place, but it was in the Pontchartrain Hotel. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I don't even think I want to say how old I but it was several decades ago. Let's put it that way. But it was I always loved food. I could cook food. I had a grandmother who was a great cook, a mother who was a great cook. But this was that seminal experience that I had that kind of just blew my mind. So I had a piece of fresh caught fish that had an anchovy butter. So it was an umami bomb, essentially. Yeah. But I didn't know that. I didn't know anything about that kind of thing. And I remember that first bite, putting it in my mouth, and my whole world changed. Literally, it was like, oh my gosh.
Is this possible?
Yes, is this possible? Right. And so New Orleans holds that place for me of being this extremely special spot because of that moment in my love of food.
I mean, so the Pontchartrain Hotel is like a historic, actually, and they're represented in the Big Book of King Cake. because they have, I don't know if they would have had, I think they've gone through, there was like a stretch where they were not kind of calling back to their past so much. And so now their current restaurant, which is called Jack Rose, does call back to some of those older food items you could have gotten at the Pontchartrain Hotel restaurant. And so one of them is the Mile High Pie. Did you happen to have the Mile High Pie?
I think we did for dessert. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they do have like a king cake version of that. But also I just love that restaurant is one of the most fun places to get a meal, I think. And the quality is really, really good also, but it's just like such a, you can tell people are there to have a celebration while they're eating, not the same kind of thing you'd find in, I mean, you can go to some restaurant on Bourbon Street and people are celebrating, but it's different than that. It's you know, an alcohol fueled affair, but not to the degree you might find on Bourbon Street. It's really nice. I like going there also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So those were my memories of New Orleans. And now we're going to take it to, at this point in time, 2023, and people, friends of yours are coming and you want to show them your New Orleans in terms of not only culinary New Orleans, but also cultural New Orleans. So will you walk us through that?
Yeah. And I think when people come to visit, the thing I'm always thinking of is like, okay, well, what's uniquely New Orleans here? And so the two big food traditions that are harder to get elsewhere, and they might be present in name, but not so strictly the way you can get it in New Orleans or in Louisiana, would be Creole food and Cajun food. And there's so much overlap between them, but you may find some different menu items. And so I try to make sure that those are possible. But then also there's, you know, not to the same degree you'd find in New York or London, but there are plenty of other like food traditions that have made their way to the city as well. And like with our Italian food scene, for example, the kind of Italian food you might find traditionally in New Orleans versus traditionally in New York City are pretty different because it's kind of Creole and Italian fused. And there's an awesome book about it by Liz Williams that is really lays out how Creole and Italian kind of melded into this thing you find in New Orleans. But so with all that in mind, I'd say the meals that I've definitely been bringing people to, and these are because they're my favorites. Toup's Meadery is Isaac Toup is a well-known chef here. And so at Toup's Meadery, it's the best pork chop I've ever had in my life. This is a very Cajun place. He's one of you're not going to find too many restaurants out in other parts of the state in Cajun country. You'll find people that really embrace the Cajunness. Isaac Toup is from out there. And so he came here. And so you're going to find, you know, boudin balls, cracklins, which to me, cracklins are the most delicious thing I've done with, when I'm doing a Big Book of King Cake tour. I'll take anything that's happening in Lafayette as an event because it means I get to go there and eat a whole lot of cracklins. Chicken liver mousse, and again, like the best pork chop I've ever had in my entire life. And so that is a great spot to go in the same neighborhood. So probably the next book I'm working on is the Big Book of Po' Boys. And so po' boys are a very popular sandwich in New Orleans. And to me, still the best one is Parkway Tavern or Parkway Bakery and Tavern, which is a block away. So this is also helpful. It's a block away from Bayou St. John, which is one of the most beautiful parts of the city. The Parkway opened in 1911. And when I came back, I had to do the Mississippi Book Festival in the middle of me being in London. And I was in New Orleans for one meal. And the meal that I got was at Parkway Bakery and Tavern. I got it was a surf and turf po' boy. And so it's got a roast beef and then fried shrimp and then like the roast beef gravy on top and then put a bunch of hot sauce on it. It's so good. Like I'm going to probably go there this weekend again. I love it. Bacchanal is one of my favorites. And so similar to, because I guess when I'm thinking of people coming over, I want to make sure that, okay, we're going to eat something great. And that's probably priority number one, but then also it's great to be able to pair it with other things. And so with Parkway Bakery and Tavern, you can go to Bayou St. John and kind of go on a really beautiful walk while you're doing that and see how vibrant that part of New Orleans is. Bacchanal is a wine bar down in the Bywater neighborhood. Bywater is kind of the hipster area, but there's a great brewery nearby, Parlo Beer Lab, and then Bacchanal itself is a wine bar. And it's been there since about 2000 or so. And so I always tell people, if you can only go to one, if there was this fake world where you can only come to one place in New Orleans and you're trying to get it as most representative, Bacchanal is a really good place to go. It's got a bunch of wine at all sorts of price points. It's got live music every single night, and many times during lunchtime as well. A beautiful courtyard to hang out in with like really nice lights and stuff, and space heaters if it gets too chilly. Like great food. So you can make your own cheese plates if you want, but then they also have kind of Spanish inspired food, tapas, and also entrees and things like that. So that's a really cool place to be. And then it's also like right next to a park that you can walk along the Mississippi River. So that's very nice also. How many more should I do? I can keep going.
Oh, I'm my mouth is just continuing to water, so I'm good. Go ahead.
I'll do a couple more then. All right. So St. John, this is helpful because it's in the French Quarter. And so if you are, if you're coming to New Orleans for the first time, you should absolutely spend some time walking around the French Quarter. Those buildings have been there since the, end of the 18th century. And so definitely you want to check out, there's sometimes I have friends who come into the French Quarter and they only want to spend time or they come to New Orleans, they only want to be in the French Quarter. I think that's a mistake. But then I also have friends who come in and they're like, oh, I don't need to see the French Quarter. And I think that's a mistake too. And so I'd say it's nice to walk down Bourbon Street one time just to see what that's like. But you don't need to spend too much time there. Nice to spend a day in the broader French Quarter. And a great meal that you can have there is at a place called St. John, which is the second restaurant of probably my favorite chef in the city, Eric Cook. And so his first restaurant is called Gris. And it's kind of a more Cajun focused one. St. John is, he says, a little more Creole focused, but probably a marriage between Creole and Cajun. Some of my favorite items, they have a bacon fat seared like duck poppers that are so good. They have like the best baked mac and cheese I've ever had in my life. And then I remember the meal that I had, the entree I had was, I might get this wrong, Creole beef, is it daubé? Is that how you say it? Creole beef daubé, which is braised in red wine and garlic, and it's got these mashed potatoes. It was such a good meal. And I'm in a dinner club. There's 6 of us, and we're called the Taste Buds. And we do a meal every month, and somebody picks where we're going to go. And so my choice is coming up soon, and I am definitely picking St. John because I don't think they've gone there yet. It's a good one. Fried chicken, you're in the South. So Willie Mae's Scotch House is probably the best fried chicken I've ever had in my life. That's a really good one. Like many cities in the US, breweries are kind of everywhere. Breweries are popping up left and right. And so sometimes the food truck scenes can be really fun around them. My favorite food truck is Southern's, and they have a really good fried chicken sandwich, and they also serve cracklins. So it's a good chance to get cracklins, which I can't talk, as you can tell, I can't talk more highly about it than I already am. And then there's like fun Italian things. And so there's a restaurant called Mosca's, spelled Mosca''S, and it's been there since like the early 1900s, like really old school New Orleans Italian, which also means like kind of mafia connections to it as well. Probably not so much anymore, but it's a little bit of a haul to get out there. But it's just like if everything feels really old school. They've got like just a few entrees that make up the menu, but they're really great, and so it's you feel like you turn back in time. When you eat at a place like that. And then in the city, there's a restaurant called Josephine Estelle, which is an Italian place I like a lot. And one of my favorite meals there, have you ever heard of the Feast of the Seven Fishes?
Mm-hmm, sure. On New Year's, Christmas Eve, I mean.
Yeah, Christmas Eve. And so we kind of stretch it out, and it's kind of just, you'll find a couple of them, because New Orleans, I think next to New York City, had the most Sicilians coming in the late 1800s, early 1900s. I think we had something like 300,000 or something come in during that stretch of time. And so Feast of the Seven Fishes was one of the traditions they brought here. And so, as you know, but for those who don't, it's a meal that consists of 7 different fish options. And at this particular meal at Josephine Estelle, they were doing it as a fundraiser for someone. And so they had 7 of the best chefs in New Orleans each prepare one of those fish dishes. And it was so much fun and so great. And just the regular menu is really tasty. It's at the Ace Hotel, so you can get a great cocktail kind of at the bar right next to it. It's in the middle of kind of the business district area, and they have a great music venue right next to it also. So yeah, that's those are some of my favorites. But I could go on forever. I've got more, but I feel like
well, maybe you'll break out a few more when we do it this way. So yeah. Now your friends are only going to be there for breakfast one day. Where are you going?
I'd say I'm going to Katie's, which they have. It's kind of a good brunch spot, and they are one of the few places that still do a bottomless brunch, which I think is one of the greatest inventions known to man. Is that you sit there and then you can take a nice leisurely decadent brunch while enjoying mimosas and things like that at $10 for unlimited or whatever. And it's fun to go there and kind of hang out and just a nice lazy Sunday. And I did an article. It was very contentious. This was before I wrote the King Cake book. I was starting to do something called Top 504. And so 504 is the area code in New Orleans. And so kind of like Top 504. And I just picked random food or drink things and tell my top 5 in an article. And I did top 5 pizzas. And I chose, there's a lot of like New York style pizza places in New Orleans, and some of them are very good. My number 1 place was Katie's, which is this brunch place, because they have it's more of like a St. Louis style pizza with I can't remember what that kind of cheese is called, Provençal. Yeah. And so they have that, but they merge it with I can't remember what like a braised pork on top of it as well. And it's amazing, but they have a very long menu, and it's a really good one too. So, and it's right in the middle of a neighborhood also, not too far from Bayou St. John either. So it's just kind of a nice place to hang out for brunch, I'd say.
Okay. Did you do your top 5 beignets?
I have not done my top 5 beignets. I feel like Café du Monde has to be, because it's so historic. And even I think, it's in the French Quarter, but you can also so you're kind of to me, doing something like that, but being part of the vibrant French Quarter is really fun. There's a line oftentimes to get your beignets, but again, it's really, there's not much better people watching than that corner if the weather is nice. But there's also a Café du Monde in the city park. So if you want to try them, but you don't want to do the crazy, French Quarter wait in line, City Park is a beautiful place to go. And the Café du Monde there is in a really beautiful part of it. And so it's right near the Louisiana Children's Museum is right there. The New Orleans Museum of Art is in the park as well. Just makes for great walking and bike riding and stuff as well. You can rent a little boat to be on the lake there. And so there's lots of other good things to do while you get your beignets as well.
And what I like about what you said, I think it's kind of what you're doing is you're combining the eating and the experience, and it turns into something that's more, essentially. Because I'm sure that if we talk to some other people who are familiar with New Orleans, they're going to say, well, everybody thinks about going to Café du Monde, but you should really go here for the beignet. But what you said really strikes a chord with me, because look, maybe there's some other places that have better or just as good beignets, but for the whole cultural experience, this is the number 1 spot.
Yeah, if you're trying to walk out of 3 days and feel like New Orleans a little bit better, then I think making these kind of decisions could help you get everything you're doing is really maximizing. You're putting yourself in a position to see more and hear more and experience the city more than you would, I guess, otherwise.
Okay, so you've already given us, I know, probably your favorite lunch place, because you told us about the sandwich that you ate and that you're going to go again in the next few days or whatever. But give us something else. So if you want to say you don't want to have a po' boy, you want to have a sit down lunch somewhere. Where are you going?
So, well, you had mentioned Commander's Palace. They have a really fun lunch, and they have, I think during it, they do 10-cent martinis. And so for me, Commander's
Palace, a fun lunch.
Yeah, it'd be a very fun lunch. Galatoire's in the French Quarter is kind of a similar thing, where they're kind of classic New Orleans restaurants. The service is impeccable, and the scene, if you go to a lunch at Galatoire's, for example, or Commander's Palace, you're going to see people in business suits. And if you go on a Friday, you're going to wonder wow, I sat down at 1 o'clock to eat this lunch, and these people seem to be at work today, but it's now 4 o'clock and they don't seem like they're going back to the office at all. I don't know what kind of good work they're going to be doing after they go back. And that is also part of the New Orleans kind of spirit. I think Friday lunches are pretty fun. And so I think going to one of those old school New Orleans spots could be really nice.
How about chicory coffee?
I don't drink much coffee. I drink an iced Irish coffee at Finn McCool's, my very favorite kind of pub. It's owned by an Irish family. I love soccer and I love American football, so great place to kind of just watch sports in general. So that's where I'd go for the kind of coffee that I like. But chicory coffee, I know that Cafe Du Monde does do kind of an old-fashioned chicory coffee, so that would be a good option to kind of combine the two. I'm going to sound like a 2-year-old right now because I know that a lot of people will dip the beignets in the coffee. I don't like coffee though, so I will dip it in chocolate milk, which is where I sound like a toddler. But
I think that works, so it's fine.
yeah.
How about a dinner? You want to have I'm going to say a really romantic type of dinner.
Mm-hmm. I would say for a really romantic dinner, I went recently to Clancy's, which is in large part, it's in the Uptown neighborhood. And so just like even walking through the neighborhood to get there, there's a really nice park nearby. That's a good start. And then it's like a lot of, it feels like, I think part of the room, like it is a nice restaurant. It is, if you're going to pick 7 of the nicest restaurants to eat at in New Orleans, it's making that list. But it's also right in the middle of this neighborhood. It feels like the people who are there come there often. And even like I went with my publisher, actually, Brahmi, she lives right by there. And when we were arriving, everyone, all like the service staff knew them already. And so it feels like a lot of people who return because they love it. And I think it kind of gives that like, this vibe of like, there's nothing crazy happening here. It's just like you're gonna get a really good meal in a really comfortable setting. And I think there's something romantic about that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and you already hit on Italian, and we've certainly talked about Creole, and we've talked about Cajun, but as you detailed in the big book of King Cake, there are many other cultures represented in New Orleans. Honduran, for example, Thai, just everything you can think of. So do you have any particular places that you really like to go for food that represent that other populations in New Orleans are cooking, we'll say?
Yeah, that's a good prompt, because if you come to New Orleans, you should really go to New Orleans East and try the Vietnamese food there. And Dong Phang, DONG space PHUONG is they're a James Beard award-winning restaurant, and they make some of the best. They make the most popular king cake in the city at this point. But they also have just like incredible banh mi's and incredible pho and all sorts of things you can get there. And so it's a hike to get out there, but it's well worth it. It's definitely an experience to eat there. So that's a great one. I can't believe I haven't mentioned it already. As far as like Middle Eastern food, so there's 2 great ones. Shaya, which was originally created by the James Beard award-winning chef Alon Shaya. He left there and started his own restaurant, or another restaurant, Saba. And so Saba, both of those restaurants, Shaya and Saba, are incredible. They have these hummuses, they have like a fried chicken hummus that is one of my favorite lunches of all time. So it's a good combo of the South and Middle Eastern. They have a lamb ragu hummus that is so good. And often when I go to either of those restaurants, I don't even make it to entree because I just start packing it in on all of these like initial courses. And so one day I'll learn my lesson. Those are some good ones.
All right, dessert.
Let's see here. Bakery Bar is a really nice spot because they are open till midnight or beyond. And you can get another cake, maybe New Orleans' second favorite cake to king cake would be dobage. And so dobage, like very thinly, like many thin layers. And it's said to have been founded. I mean, it's derived from something kind of Eastern European, but a woman who was who had Eastern European descent back in like the early 1900s, lived in New Orleans, and she kind of introduced the city to a version of that eventually got called dobage cake. And so Bakery Bar specializes in many different kinds of dobage cake, as well as cake balls, as well as these little triangle cake flavors. And they have these really nice kind of dessert forward or sweet cocktails and things. And it's just a nice place to kind of hang out in the Irish Channel / Lower Garden District, not very far from downtown. If you're staying at one of the hotels downtown, you're able to kind of walk there pretty easily. And so I would say that's a good one for dessert.
Okay. And you did mention in our little tour here, places to stop along the way and see, but what about if somebody wants to experience jazz? Where would you suggest that they go?
Yeah, so there's so many different. I mean, we have no shortage of these here, and so let's see here. I really like, if you're downtown, the Ritz-Carlton hotel has Jeremy Davenport plays there almost every single night, and so that's a great place to hear like some real classic jazz music. And then for me, like I don't know if it's always jazz, but Tipitina's is an institution like none other. Like every city should have a place like Tipitina's, where like it's not a music venue, like there's no seating at all, but there's a lot of people who it's big enough that you can fit some really good acts. And you see a lot of like, if you check the schedule, the schedule for Tipitina's is littered with like New Orleans or Louisiana famous acts. So you're not going to get, when Elton John comes through, or tonight, I think Andrea Bocelli's playing. He's not playing at Tipitina's, he's playing at like the Superdome. But if you want to hear some of Louisiana's best music, you go to Tipitina's and see what's on the schedule, and it's reasonably priced. And it's also like, you walk in and you're like, this feels like kind of a dive bar that's also a really great music venue. And they teach Cajun dancing sometimes on Sundays and stuff. There's like a wide variety of things you're going to see there. So that's a really good place to go. And it feels like, again, like you're exploring a different part of the city than you might have otherwise. So that's a good one.
I haven't thought honestly about going back to New Orleans in quite a long period of time, because well, there's just so many places to go. I mean, anyway, and now it's like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm going to do. I've got to put it on the list, and I've got to put it on the list really near the top, because you were just enticing me with every single place that you were describing, and it sounded so amazing, the diversity of flavors and the styles. And I really relate to your way of eating, I think, and your way of approaching food. So that was another thing that made me just smile from the inside. So I want to thank you, Matt, so much for taking us on that tour. And hopefully we are going to find that people, listeners, viewers are going to have a much easier time now of experiencing New Orleans from a culinary and cultural standpoint. So
can I throw one more in, Steve? Is that all right?
Please, Matt. So,
because I think it gets you up into the Audubon Park area. Audubon Park is I run there every single day. It's like a beautiful. I can't remember the name of the guy who designed Central Park in New York City, but same park designer. It's just a beautiful place to kind of hang out in. But if you're there in the mornings, a really good breakfast place to go that's nearby is called Tartine. And it's just kind of like a classic, sort of French inspired cafe. And they don't do dinner, they just do breakfast and lunch. And you can get like the food. They have my favorite king cake, but in addition to that, you can get like a baked eggs and brioche thing that is just like knocks my socks off. They have the best quiche I've ever had. Like different scones of the day. It's just a really nice place to go and hang out also. And so I would highly recommend it.
Perfect way to end our little culinary tour, Matt. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me again. I appreciate it.
Hey, Matt Haines, the author of 2 books, The Big Book of King Cake and The Little Book of King Cake. Pleasure always to visit with you. And you've been listening to Great Taste, 60 minutes of deliciousness. I'm your host, Steve Boss.
Great taste. Sweet. Sour. So good to taste.